criminal.
Hello ladies and germs, welcome back after a grueling 6 months to the newest Resident Evil retrospective, and finally the last one in the classic saga. So without further ado, hold on, before we start, you're going to see this guy from now on who will help me to convey my emotions and just give you something to look at. There'll be various different types. This art, as well as the thumbnail, has been lovingly created by my incredibly talented friend Lex, whose socials you can see on the screen now. So if you are in need of amazing work, safe for work or otherwise, or wink, I encourage you to greatly go and message her. She's been amazing to work with on this, and I'm completely dumbfounded by how good the art has been in such a short amount of time. So go message her now. I am serious. No, I'm serious. This video is not starting until you go and message her. That's fine. That's fine. I can wait. I have all the time in the world. Okay, seriously, why are you still here? Go. Go now. I swear to fucking God! By 1999, Resident Evil had slammed its foot into the doorframe and defined itself as the big boss. When you can say my name as the name horror games, and had made it clear to everyone around them that they weren't going anywhere anytime soon, and the ramifications of the success of Resident Evil has led to thousands upon thousands of games following the same controls or atmosphere of the early games. Shinji Mikami and Capcom had created a giant of a franchise, with not just one game labelled as a masterpiece, but somehow two back-to-back games labelled as such. So after the overwhelming success of Resident Evil 2, it was apparent that they were going to try for a third time, and by God, they were going to get it right again. However, Capcom got very greedy, and because of them, the third game, unfortunately, does not reach the same heights as the original two. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't boil down to just Capcom's greed. It boils down mostly to Capcom's greed, but it also comes down to really poor management overall. Capcom saw the success that the Resident Evil franchise had brought so far and decided to start many different Resident Evil projects on the side. I am sorry. I know this is meant to be a serious review, but I'm very sick right now. I'm dying. I'm actually gonna die. It's over for me. I'm a 20-year-old man and I've got the flu. It's actually over. I'm dead. I'm gonna die. It's been nice knowing you all. Thank you all for your support, but I'm gonna fucking die. The next installment was originally going to be directed by Hideki Kamiya, known best for directing Resident Evil 2 and Devil May Cry 2 years later. The plot for this game would have, interestingly, followed Hunk transporting a G-Virus sample from Raccoon City via a cruise ship, which is a very similar environment to both Resident Evil Revelations and another great horror game called Cold Fear, which, surely I will never cover on this channel, right? Capcom swiftly cancelled this, however, as Sony had announced the release of the PlayStation 2. After the announcement of the PlayStation 2, Capcom had a huge panic attack. The PlayStation 2 created a big array of discourse for Capcom, and as a result, they scrapped the original Resident Evil 3 idea and adjusted it by promoting one of their side projects to the forefront and pushing Kamiya and his remaining team to Resident Evil 4, which, in my opinion, without the 4 and a bit years of cooking they had now for Resident Evil 4, I don't think it would have been anywhere near the massive game it is now. I think that getting rid of the original Resident Evil 3 and pushing them to the side really changed the course of history, because we could have had something completely different. But we are living in the best timeline. We had to sacrifice Resident Evil 3 and the quality of that game so that we could have Resident Evil 4, and I think that's a pretty good trade-off. I'm not gonna lie. You know what, I'm sorry, I keep getting distracted here. I'm going to go off on a tangent quickly. I live in England, and if you didn't know, England is a shithole. Don't get me wrong, I live in a really bad place, but it's not as bad as Birmingham. There's some crackheads outside arguing, and now fucking 7 alarms are going off. So not only do I have the flu, I got a new tattoo as well, so my hand is killing me. So I've got that to deal with, I've got the flu, and now I've got these arseholes outside who keep fighting, so yeah, England. So if you're wondering why this video took so long to come out, it's not entirely because I'm lazy. It's because everything else around me just hasn't fallen into place so I can comfortably record this video. The project that would become the Resident Evil 3 we all know now was created by a very, very inexperienced team and had the absolute plan to introduce a brand new character who would take the same position as Jill in trying to escape Raccoon City. However, Capcom ultimately made the executive decision to make the main character Jill. The game was not created by Resident Evil's flagship team, and I can't emphasize enough that this was an entirely brand new, inexperienced team. They were put on such a monumental task as making the next mainline Resident Evil game. Could you imagine the stress that these guys were under? However, I will admit, Capcom didn't just put them in a room and say, hey, make a Resident Evil game. Okay, bye. No, the team had their script and story read by the original main team, and they worked very closely with all of the directors and producers to ensure that everybody was happy with how the plot of the game would play out with the Resident Evil universe. With that, development on RE3 Nemesis was in full production, with only one problem. They had less than a year to make a full mainline Resident Evil game. It seemed like an impossible task, but Capcom and Resident Evil were no stranger to impossible tasks. They had managed to make 2 banger games, so surely making a third one wouldn't be that difficult, would it? A new group of inexperienced game devs being forced to make a brand new mainline RE game to combat the likes of RE1 and RE2 that would not only live up to its predecessors but also set the standard for how Resident Evil was going to play out in its universe next, with a compelling story that not only expands the RE universe but complements the already established lore, and do it all in under a year. Somehow these crazy bastards did it. Sure, RE3 was received worse than its counterpart, and sold considerably less, but it is still a pretty damn solid and, well, universally acclaimed all around, with some even calling it the most sophisticated Resident Evil game yet, and yet, to be honest, that's a pretty accurate assessment. The team bumped up the environment, the enemy spawns on screen, and most importantly, the new Tyrant system and AI. Resident Evil 3 was set out as a much more action-packed game to its predecessors, with mechanics now included like dodging and quick turning, and a lot more action set pieces. The stakes were never higher, both for the IRL development team and for Jill Valentine herself, poetically so that both were under intense pressure to accomplish their goal in time. Before I begin covering the game, I cannot stress enough that the vision for it was always for it to be a side game with less runtime and for it to cost less. This is why I'm going to skip over a lot of the later game, because it's just as rushed or repeated from older games, so just a disclaimer that the game, and subsequently so the recap, will be shorter after the midway point of the game. Resident Evil 3 begins with the usual exposition describing to us what happened to Jill and what she's been doing since the Spencer mansion of RE1, which took place roughly 3 months before the destruction of Raccoon City. She gives us some much needed insight into how Umbrella is a massive company that no one can even begin to step up to. She goes on about how the wheels of justice, and it's implied that either her or someone else is legally trying to bring down an Umbrella to the best they can, but they're failing greatly. We then, for one of the first proper times, get to see the actual carnage of the Raccoon City outbreak from a grounded level during the start, as civilians are getting killed left, right and centre. The entire police force is sent out to try and combat this, and Umbrella sends in its cleanup crew to try and eliminate the threat that they inadvertently created. Of course, we know that Umbrella is really using the outbreak as a sandbox for their tyrant bioweapons, as we will see very soon. What follows this is a CGI cutscene of everyone dying in various horrific ways. Jill is immediately thrown into action, literally from an explosion from her apartment complex, which that's a hell of a way to start a game. What pretty much everybody will realise first of all is that she has a fully automatic gun as her starting weapon, but we quickly find out that even that isn't enough, as Jill is quickly surrounded and forced through a door where she meets good old hang on, let me just Dario. Yeah. She meets good old Dario, who is okay, fine, you got me. It doesn't matter who he is, okay? Who gives a fuck who he is? He's locked himself in a container and, I don't know, he fucking dies off camera or some shit. Fucking fat blonde bellend. Jill leaves him behind, and after longer than I'd like to admit trying to find the door out of that place, escapes into a back room that leads to the city. We also get a glimpse at some new items and a new mechanic. We see that health sprays now have a sort of bundle pack box thing that contains 3 sprays to save space. We also have 2 handbooks that explain the dodge mechanic and the reloading tool item, which allows us to use gunpowder, which is now a thing, and can be combined into different types of ammo. This is all basic stuff now, but at the time this was completely new. Going back to the dodge mechanic, I'll be completely honest, I've rarely used it during my gameplay, and I managed to get through the game just as easy not using it, but I guess in later difficulties there are times where it could really be a lifesaver. The streets in this game are cool. The level design, goes seamlessly from a tight corridor environment that we are used to a wider open area, but don't get me wrong, the majority of the game is usually tight alleyways. The map this time around is a lot more jarring and intimidating with its size compared to the other RE entries. While we explore Raccoon City's areas, there's a lot more zombies than we are used to, and more frequent too. However, these are only the base zombies that can be easily dispatched with the minigun while we have the ammo. We eventually run into Brad. You remember Brad. He is the helicopter pilot from RE1. Yeah, Brad. He's fighting off zombies. He then warns us that some sort of, incoming threat is hunting down STARS members, and that means he's coming for us, one way or another. After some more running around and killing zombies, we get to a gate locked with rope that must be burnt off before progressing. After burning it with a lighter and gas, Jill makes it to outside the RPD, where we are officially introduced to the certified son of a bitch that is Nemesis.
Jill!
Brad!
We've got to... Jill! Help!
He immediately makes his mark as our opponent for this game by killing Brad straight away with no remorse. It's here we are introduced to yet another mechanic, the live selection system. In each encounter with the Nemesis, the player is given two options and they must choose one. The choices are normally to either fight him or to run away, which the option we will pick will affect either the environment or the gameplay. Of course, I'm not some sort of monster who will keep you in suspense of what the outcome for each choice is, so I'll tell you what I chose and the outcome of both options. I chose the safe option of running into the RPD and avoiding the first fight. The main MacGuffin here in the RPD is Brad or Jill's star card, which is needed for the computer. If we chose to fight Nemesis, we would have access to the card much earlier by looting Brad's body outside at the cost of precious ammo in the early game. However, by running into the RPD, we now have to go and find Jill's card inside, which can take ages if the player doesn't know where it is exactly. The first choice of this game basically just comes down to how fast you want to get through the RPD section. It's also worth noting that on the hard difficulty, killing Nemesis each time will drop an item, that being 2 parts of a handgun, a first aid box, 2 shotgun parts, another first aid box, and finally an assault rifle or infinite ammo weapon, depending on if you finished the game prior or not. However, these are more incentive to kill the Nemesis rather than flee. This is only a thing in hard mode, so for my run it's completely pointless to take into consideration. However, since this is my first main encounter, it's about as easy as finding a paedophile in the Minecraft community. The game now technically branches into 2 sections, so look at it as 2 different runs that converge at the same sort of point. In my run, I choose to flee into the RPD and avoid confrontation, where I now needed to go and find Jill Starr's key, which added around 10 minutes or so, and is found in the meeting room if you were interested. If I had fought Nemesis, however, I'd already have gotten a keycard and thus never needed to go all the way to the meeting room. Are you starting to see how the choice system works now? It's not going to impact the game greatly, however, it does add just a little bit of extra game design. That is certainly appreciated. It's nice to have it rather than to not have it. Using the card on the PC, the security systems are now lifted, giving us access to the rest of the RPD and to the STAR's office most importantly, because that's our destination. Keep in mind, this section takes place before Leon comes in, so some parts in RE2 are actually affected by what we do in RE3, which is kind of cool. In the evidence room, we can pick up a STAR's key and a blue gem, which will be paramount later, so get it while you can. Up in the STAR's room, the idea here is to just look around. You can get the revolver here and a couple of extra items, but really nothing happens till you leave the room, where in true Resident Evil fashion, the radio magically comes online. The next objective is quite vague, and we're basically told to go meet these guys for evacuation near the subway system tram station thing. Here is where the game really opens up to the player. You now have all of Raccoon City's vast streets to explore and find your way to where you need to be. I say all of Raccoon City. Obviously, for a PlayStation 1 game, it's impossible to, gauge that scope. But you get access to most of downtown Raccoon City. And honestly, for one of the first ever free roam games, well, not free roam games, but for one of the first ever games with an actual semi-open world, it's quite big. It is quite a big map. It can be jarring to somebody who's just jumped off of Resident Evil 1 to play Resident. I don't know why you'd play 1. Well, actually, no. It would make sense to play 1 and then 3. Yeah. So if you go the canonical route and play Resident Evil 1 and then Resident Evil 3, I imagine it can be quite jarring. But I'm glad I played 2 before 3, because I get I'm more akin to Raccoon City now. I'm not going to cover every little detail here because the video would be longer than it already is, but I'll go over the main plot points to help progress the story. You remember that gem from earlier, the blue one in the evidence room? It's crucial to opening the City Hall gate, which is activated by a time lock and is missing a couple of gems. So, first stop is to take a detour to the newspaper place, where upstairs we are introduced to Daddy Carlos in all his pixelated glory. Before we can get out though, Big Nemi comes up to rock our shit, and here we get our second choice, hide or jump out of the window. This time, I decide to hide, which knocks Nemesis out from an exploding pipe or some other MacGuffin, but he immediately wakes up and starts chasing us. Carlos springs into action, and I became stun-locked behind him, so it was up to his trusty machine gun to destroy Nemesis, but apparently, even that isn't a match for him, and Carlos died horribly. Yeah. So, naturally, I armed the fuck up this time and went back ready to fight the bastard, and after just a few magnum rounds to the chest, he fell to the floor, gyrating in pain. Our next area is the basement of a kitchen. This is where the choice system effect plays out. Since we killed Nemesis in the newspaper, I say killed, quote unquote killed, Nemesis in the newspaper place, he never comes to this area, and we are technically free to explore leisurely to find the green gem. If we had jumped out the window, however, we would have met Nemesis here, and he would have fucked this place up, making access to the kitchen impossible, meaning we would have to find another way out and back onto the streets, with the gem being in the newspaper place now. Little differences, but still important nonetheless. With all the gems in our hands, we can now go through City Hall. We end up in the tram with Carlos's people. There is a lot I'm going to skip over here because in all honesty it's just go here and solve this puzzle and get this MacGuffin, and I also want you to have some sort of reason to want to play the game for yourself. If I explain everything, it takes away from, the beauty of Resident Evil. The main takeaway story points are that we need to get the tram running. To do that we need 3 components that Jill has to go and find. There's a Nemesis fight that is so small and short that it's not even worth mentioning. Oh, and Jill fights a giant sandworm. Back at the train, they group start it up, and surprise surprise, Nemesis jumps on. We can now either fight or flee to another train carriage. Carlos's buddy Mikhail will die either way here, and we will end up cutting the brakes, which will derail the train into the clock tower area. The decision you make either to use the emergency brake or to jump out of the window, you will end up in one of 2 sections of the clock tower. Again, it just determines how fast you will get around this place. The clock tower is, all in essence, kind of short and very boring, in my humble opinion. The section of the game is where most of my complaints come from. The beginning story and section introduced us to a semi-open world and large map with choices that affect the linearity of the story. You have a lot to explore, a lot to find, and there's a nice blend of environment between Resident Evil 1's close quarters combat areas and also an open world map where you can, investigate puzzles, you can do your killing, you can get items and stuff. And it's really cool. It's a nice concept and it's a good early mark of Resident Evil 3. However, the clock tower is pretty much completely linear and can be done in only a few short minutes. After some running around and some very infuriating puzzles if you don't have a guide, we end up on top of the clock tower. And we turn it on, so we can signal a helicopter, but Nemesis, being Nemesis, blows that shit up and decides to fuck up Jill. Carlosito comes in and tries to kill Nemesis, but is hit onto his ass. The section ends and Jill is now unconscious and infected, meaning for the time, we are now playing as Daddy Carlos. Daddy Carlos! I know I am skimming over the clock tower section, but that's because the majority of it kind of feels like a small RE1 section with the tight hallways and, the puzzles that are needlessly complicated, and I'm fairly certain that that's where the inspiration for it came from. I'm not skipping it because I hate it or because I'm lazy. Well, no, I'm really skipping it because I don't want to take away completely from your experience should you decide to play it, which I really think you should play it for yourself. With Jill unconscious, I'd say this is most probably the halfway point of the game. Carlos now heads over to the hospital where we need to find a cure for Jill, Surely there's not just going to be a vaccine for this virus laying around. That would be ridiculous. Oh, I guess they just had a vaccine laying around. That might have come in handy for, yeah, that might have come in handy at some point. The hospital blows up and Carlos escapes back to Jill, where he can administer our MacGuffin vaccine. The hospital is, again, a very small section of the game itself, and is much more action-packed. Nemesis punches through the roof into the hall with a brand new badass look to him, and we can just run into the next room, and then the next room. And finally, we will meet with Jill again. Carlos tells her that Nikolai is somehow still alive. If you don't know who Nikolai is, because I haven't done a very good job of explaining who Nikolai is, you don't really need to know who Nikolai is. He's just a Russian guy who's like evil. He's a part of... I forgot to mention this, actually. This is a very important plot piece that I probably should have mentioned in the beginning, but I'm mentioning it now. Carlos and his team are part of the Umbrella cleanup crew, which is why Jill distrusts Carlos, because she blames Umbrella for all of this, and rightfully so, it is their fault. So she sees them coming in to, you know, clean up their shit as kind of a fuck you. So she's really not trusting of the crew, and Nikolai is, well, surprisingly evil. Not just because he's Russian. I'm not saying Russian people are evil, but they do make very good generic villains. Finally, now it's time to move on to where the endgame takes us. You guessed it, a lab. Jill runs through a courtyard, a sewer system, and ends up in a confrontation with Nikolai in a helicopter. That was our only form of escape. So we are now pretty much boned. A voice calls over the intercom saying that a missile strike is coming, and Jill and Carlos fucking blow up and die. That's it. That's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next video, which is going to be a true crime video. Yeah, right, so thank you guys. I'll see you next time. Sorry, I had to include that dead unfunny bit at least once in a video. Actually happens is Jill runs about for a bit into a final confrontation with a heavily mutated final form Nemesis, where after a grueling last battle, we get one final choice: run or exterminate.
Stars? I'll give you stars.
Killing him will cause Jill to give one of the corniest and coolest one-liners to ever grace human history. Running is, well, you run away. So, we all know what the correct option of the two is here. Of course, after finally escaping via a helicopter, we know what happens. Raccoon City is blown up once and for all. Finally, we never have to talk about Raccoon City again, and the game ends with Jill saying Umbrella is going down. We also get a final touching cutscene, which is a nice, fitting end to the RE3 classic trilogy. And that is quite literally how the game ends. I could sit and explain how I skipped a lot of places and puzzles, but if I sat and went through every single tiny detail, you would be so incredibly bored. The game was rushed by a completely new dev team who had little experience at all, and it really does show in the later half of the game. I cannot stress this enough. The later half of the game, towards the midpoint at the clock tower, it dies down heavily. It's definitely good. RE3 is definitely good, but it does not match up to RE2 or 1. It doesn't even come close. But that, ladies and germs, is the original trilogy of Resident Evil in its entirety. We have now covered RE1, RE2, RE3, as well as Outbreak, Zero, and everything in between. That leaves one more side game before we can enter what I like to call the experimental era of Resident Evil games. For reference, 1 to 3 I class as the golden era, or the classics. 4 to 6 is the experimental era, and 7 to 8 so far is the modern era. Now that I've fully covered all of the original games, I can solidly say that going back to how slow these games were, and how the writing and gameplay in general was back then, was a chore. People always tend to act like the classics are the better version and the best way to experience the games, and they do a really good job of being classics. They are the original at the end of the day, and that's how it was intended to be played. I'd much prefer the remake of 1 and 2 any day of the week compared to the originals. Sure, you could chalk that up to me being born in 2003 with games well past that era. However, I can sit and play through Metal Gear 1 with no problem. For some reason, old survival horror is just, well, it's labelled as classic for a reason. That's not to disparage you from going and playing these games. Please, if you can try them. In my humble opinion, the best way to play them would be on the original hardware. If you can get a PlayStation 1 and the original disc copied of these games, do it. Play it on a CRT TV with no guides, no internet, nothing. Figure everything out yourself. Play these games as they were intended to be played. I am not by any means saying the original games are horrible by today's standards, but the simple fact is, they are dated. Soon enough, they'll be reaching nearly 30 years old, and it's okay to admit that old games aren't always going to be exactly as good as we remember them being. Times change, preferences change, and with today's normalized standard of HD textures and ultra realistic graphics, it's hard sometimes to go back and appreciate those earlier games. But I think that if you can go back and genuinely enjoy the game you've played as a child that changed your life and still relive those games without a doubt or any hindrance to that memory, that is something very special that you should cherish. Classic RE has had a monumental impact on gaming and has set foundations for many companies, many games, and the ramifications of their success are still heard today. After the lackluster reception of RE3, I think Capcom wanted to take a break to try and rekindle what made Resident Evil great to begin with. While Code Veronica would release a year later in February 2000 and RE0 in 2002, it's RE4 as the next mainline game in 2005 that would establish Resident Evil as the legendary series it is and would truly redefine first-person shooters. But for now, let's just take a small minute to appreciate the older games, to appreciate where we came from, and give thanks to the amazing work the beginning teams did in creating such an amazing franchise that I love, that you love. You're watching this video because you love Resident Evil and you wanted to see a recap on Resident Evil 3. Whether you've played it before, whether you just want to hear my opinions, we are here because we share the same common interests. And without these teams, and without these games, without this trial and error and all this in the 90s, we wouldn't have this connection. We wouldn't have these games. Who knows where we'd be? But for now, I think it's time we put classic Resident Evil to rest and let it stay where it should be, in the past. Well, there's actually one more section I need to talk about before letting the trilogy go. While ultimately it's hard for us to say what the original team wanted to go with, but what we did end up with lost a lot of its stuff. To begin with, our fan favourite character, Tofu, was found in the game but is ultimately unused. Rest in peace, Tofu. As for items, we have demon coins, remote control and batteries, a broken fire hose and adapter, Giga Oil, a chain, chemical, keyring, and a dummy or developer key, which is just the spade key for Resident Evil 2, which I think is just a stand-in. Jill has also had quite a few costume designs and changes, and that's honestly pretty much it for Resident Evil 3's cut content. I wish that, well, there is more, obviously. We don't know how far along they got in development of the original Resident Evil 3 with Hunk, but we can assume that there was, Hunk's missing model, some enemies from there, and obviously the cruise ship, but again, we don't know how far they got into development with that, so we can't really turn around and say how much of that content is missing. I won't bother going over what RE3 was meant to be, as I have technically already covered that to begin with. RE3 in all essence was a rush job, and was always meant to be a side game sold at a cheaper price. However, after the cancellation of the Hunt game, which was meant to be RE3, it was promoted, and thus we ended up with the RE3 we all know now. And it's a good send-off for the PlayStation 1 that will always remind us where we came from and how much, the series has developed over the years. It's also a good reminder of how Capcom could fuck things up. And that is that. Finally, I promise this time. 3 games, a handful of side games, and Raccoon City's story has come to an end. Much like how the conclusion of Raccoon City allows the Resident Evil universe to finally move on and develop outside the city, so too will this video allow me to finally expand out of the Resident Evil content, at least for now until I cover Code Veronica. It has been an amazing few months, and Resident Evil has skyrocketed my YouTube channel into what it is now. I'm speaking like this is the end of all Resident Evil videos I'm ever going to be doing, but for a while it's going to be the end of Resident Evil, because doing all these classic games and finding time to play through them and record the audio and write scripts and stuff has just become draining, and that's okay. I'm a human being. Human beings get drained even if they enjoy what they do. I love doing YouTube, I really do. I love making these videos, but I'm still allowed to get drained out from this. But when I do Code Veronica in probably a couple of months, Code Veronica will be interesting because I've never played through Code Veronica all the way, so that will be new for me. So I can actually give an honest opinion on Code Veronica from a perspective of somebody who's never played that game. So I am looking forward to playing through it and recording that. But for now, I am just really happy to get this video out after 8 or so months. So much has happened in between that time, so that's why it's taken so long. But I'm just happy to finally get this out. Thank you all sincerely for sticking around this long and for making my channel what it has become. I know people really don't like the soppy fucking, they don't like this soppy shit where people actually thank them, but at the same time, I don't think enough people do it. Enough YouTubers don't show their human side a lot, and that's what I like to do at the end of these videos. I like to show my human side, because I am a human making these videos, obviously. I'm not just running it through an AI and asking them to create the script. No, I genuinely do appreciate every single view, every single like, every single comment. It gives me a drive to keep doing this. Don't get me wrong, I love talking about games and I love making videos, but having that extra, having that confirmation that people are enjoying the stuff I'm putting out, just, you have no idea how much that, accelerates my ability and willpower to actually do these videos. So, honestly, thank you all for sticking around this long. I want to say thank you again to Lex. I know I suck her dick a lot, but her art has been amazing and has been the cornerstone of this video, basically, and I couldn't have made this video nearly as good as it is without you. So again, thank you, Lex. You've done an amazing job, and I can't wait to do more with you in the future. So that's it. After this video, I will compile all 3 of these games into one long video with new editing, fixed audio, and extra features. You can see that I have sort of fixed my re-uploaded Resident Evil 2 video. That's done a lot better now. I'm very happy about that. But there's not much I can do for the audio on that because I no longer have the original project. So I'm hoping that this video's audio will be a hell of a lot better, and if it's not, then I don't know, fucking leave me a comment saying I'm a retard. But no. Yeah, I'm hoping, at this stage in time, I know a lot of people say this, but every video I make, I strive to make it a little bit better, and hopefully with the editing and the sound quality in this one, you can see that, because I really do want to improve my quality of video, and I'm really trying, and I hope you can see that. I'm also going to create another video, which will be telling the story of Raccoon City from beginning to end. You might have seen I created, well, it's got basically no views, but I created a short story reading of The Raven on my channel by Edgar Allan Poe, and I want to keep doing that. I want to develop that series a little bit more, not so poems from like ye olden times, but you know, creepypastas and SCPs. I know it's been done to hell, but I'll make it interesting. I want to do horror stories and stuff like that because I grew up with it, and that is an aspect I really like. So I want to do that kind of with my other series as well. I don't know, we'll see how it takes off, but I want to experiment with doing a Raccoon City explanation video with a lot of editing and stuff, so keep an eye out for that as well. I feel like creating a not a conclusion, but a total recap of everything we've been through over the past few months into one little condensed video so you can easily get it is a really lovely place to end off. So I will stop rambling, I promise. With that said, until the next video, stay safe, and thank you for watching me yap for about an hour. I'm very sorry you had to go through that, but thank you for some reason sticking around. Goodbye! When you can't even say my name, has the memory gone? Are you feeling numb? Go and call my name. I can't play this game, so I ask again. Will you say my name? Has the memory gone? Are you feeling numb? Or have I become invisible?